pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker. I can't believe how gracious, I'm thankful rather, how gracious you were in accepting this invitation, Barry. I had a whim, thought I'd try it. You responded. That was awesome. But Barry Eisler spent 3 years in a covert position with the CIA's Directorate of Operations, then worked as a technology lawyer and startup executive in Silicon Valley and Japan, earning his black belt at the Kodokan Judo Institute along the way. Eisler's award-winning thrillers have been included in numerous best of lists and have been translated into nearly 20 languages and include the #1 bestsellers, Livy Alone, Who Scares Me to Death, The Night Trade, and The Killer Collective, my personal favorite. Eisler lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, and when he's not writing novels, blogs about national security and the media. And you can find him at www.barryeisler.com. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you for that nice introduction. And good morning, everyone. Uh, I have a number of relatively prepared presentations that I usually ask people, what do you want to talk about? And then I'll reach for one of those. But since it's early here in California and I'm not fully caffeinated yet, and most importantly, because recently I've come across some things that were super eye-opening and useful for me, you are all going to be the lucky or maybe unlucky beneficiaries of something a little more extemporaneous than what I usually do. We were talking a few minutes ago before we opened up the conversation to, I guess, the people who were in the waiting room, just about what you all might want to hear about. And it seemed the consensus was characters and world building. And as it happens, I was I'm in the middle of this really. There's a guy named Robert McKee, who's best known as a screenwriting guru. I don't know if anyone knows the name. I think he's terrific. Not everybody likes him. I think a lot of people don't understand him. They think he teaches rules, which, as McKee says, rules are things you have to do. Principles are things that if you do them, they'll work. McKee teaches principles rather than rules. And I found his stuff really interesting over the year. Read a couple books of his, attended a bunch of his lectures. Anyway, he's got this online webinar series going on right now. And it's all good, but it's one of those things where I'm listening and I'm like, yeah, I feel like I know that, I've got that. But then every now and then there's something that is just gold. So I'm going to start this morning's conversation with something that I found electrifying because it was so insightful about characters, fictional characters, but about humans too, real humans, I mean, and that I think will certainly provide me a useful framework for developing characters, understanding characters, and making your characters more realistic. So I'm going to start with this. We'll bounce around a little bit, and then hopefully relatively quickly, we'll get to the interactive part of the proceedings, because that's, in my experience, always the most useful for everyone. Everyone has their own concerns, and that'll be an opportunity for us to tailor this conversation to those concerns. But anyway, McKee's point. Okay, he was talking about the television show Mad Men, which I've actually not seen. I've heard good things about it, but I haven't seen the show. The creator, the showrunner, Anthony Weiner, and his team, this is their approach to understanding their principal characters. They approach their characters at 3 levels. The first level is what McKee, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but what he calls the public aspect, the public persona of the character. And that's the character as that character is known in the workplace, maybe at church, by the public. It's just what it sounds like. It's how do people who don't know you very well but interact with you in the public or the professional sphere, how do they know you? And then there's a second layer, which we can think of as the private self. And that's more how your in-group knows you. Your spouse, your family, your close friends, the aspects of your personality, the facets of your personality that those people know, which will obviously be distinct from what the public, professional, most exterior outgroup knows, relatively outgroup knows. And then there's a third level, which McKee calls the secret self. And that is what does your character know about herself or himself that no one, not in the public, no one else, no one in the public world and no one in the private world knows. And McKee added, and by the way, so if you know the show, like for Don Draper, the secret self would be that he appropriated the identity of another Korean war vet. Again, I don't know the show that well, but I got the idea. And McKee did a beautiful breakdown of each character at each one of these levels. It would have been useful to know the show, but it wasn't necessary. I certainly got the idea. McKee added a fourth level, which I think is the most important. And I'm sure Weiner and his team were doing this implicitly, but I think it's helpful to be aware of this fourth level more explicitly and consciously. And the fourth level is this. McKee calls it the hidden level. It's what the character is unable to recognize or face, even about herself. And to me, that's genius. There's the secret self, like these are things only I know, nobody else knows. But then there are secrets I keep even from myself. That's that fourth or hidden level. And immediately I just thought, oh my God, this is such a great way of understanding characters and people. And if you're having trouble getting to know your characters in a way that makes them feel real to you, makes them come alive on the page, I think this framework is something that could be really useful. Just one of those things every now and then you come across. This was one for me where I thought, oh my God, how have I gotten along for this long without having access to this framework? So if you're looking to create characters who are as realistic and compelling as possible, I think this could be a pretty useful framework. This is the first time I've talked about it because I just came across it, I don't know, a week or so ago. And I hope it'll be useful for you. That's McKee's thing. I've heard of some other techniques people use that I don't use myself, but I can see where they'd be useful. People ask questions like, what's in my character's closet? What's on my character's bookshelf? What kind of music does my character listen to? I think those are all perfectly good and legitimate questions. What I try to do with my characters, probably instinctively a blend of the Anthony Weiner approach, not Anthony Weiner, Matthew Weiner approach, and the what's on the bookshelf, what's in the closet approach. When I'm trying to get to know a character, I ask things like this. What were the character's formative experiences? And what does the character want? Let me reverse that, because this is for me, the most fundamental thing. It can almost be a cliche. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Galaxy Quest. Such a fantastic movie. There's a scene where Tim Allen is facing some rock monster and he doesn't know what to do. And Alan Rickman says, try to understand its motivation. And Tim Allen's like, it's a rock. It doesn't have a motivation. So I try to understand my character's motivations, but humans are complicated. It's rarely so simple as, oh, my character wants this. It's more like, what does your character think he wants? What does he really want? Because we're rarely so honest with ourselves in important things. Look, if you're thirsty, you want a glass of water. That's very straightforward. But when you're talking about life and relationships, status, like fundamental human drives, it's rarely so straightforward as the character wants the same thing and the character knows that's what he wants. Usually there's a divide. And by the way, I spent some time in Japan, and Japan has a quite interesting breakdown of this split, this divide in motivations. The concepts in Japanese are hone and tatamae. Hone means the real truth, the thing you really want. And tatamae, it doesn't mean it's false, but it's more like the public truth, the societal truth. And I think about this in contexts like, if you ask a cop, hey, why did you become a cop? You'll get an answer, but it's a public facing answer. I'm not saying it's a lie. It probably isn't. But it's the publicly digestible answer, like, well, to protect and serve. Well, I always wanted to help my fellow people. It's probably true. But is that the whole truth? Is that why each individual becomes a cop? I'm going to go with no. I'm going to go, there's more to it. Or take a doctor. Why did you become a doctor? I really wanted to heal people. My grandmother, I watched her. She was sick. She had shingles. She was in pain for a long time. And I always just thought it would be great to be able to help people who are in pain and make them better. It's not a lie. I'm not saying it's a lie, but it's the publicly acceptable truth. Okay, fine, but what's the truth beneath that truth? The particular truth, and maybe a truth that the person isn't so eager to share with the world and maybe doesn't even recognize herself. Those are all really interesting and powerful ways for me of getting to know my characters. So I like to take walks when I'm figuring things out. There's no right or wrong answer. I remember listening to a panel discussion years ago, and I think it was Tess Gerritsen, novelist Tess Gerritsen, and she said she likes to lie down on the couch when she's thinking about these things. And I thought, I like to lie down on the couch when I'm going to take a nap. I'm done. So I need to be moving when I'm having these sorts of conversations with myself, but whatever works. But that's my fundamental question. What does the character want? And then divide it into, what does she think she wants? What does she really want? And then ask about formative experiences early on, because we've all had some of those. You don't want to be too obvious about it. I mean, it can work. It's like, why did Spider-Man become Spider-Man? Because he could have stopped a criminal who wound up killing his Uncle Ben, and he's haunted by, okay, it'll work. Batman, he watched his parents murdered and he became obsessed with fighting crime. It can be done that way. Obviously successful. Ask the DC Comics universe or the Marvel Cinematic Universe or whatever. It can be done. But most people are a little more complicated and multifaceted than that. I think there's another thing McKee has said that I think is true. He said, the mind is lazy. So you're doing the hard work of trying to invent a fictional real person, a three-dimensional, really realistic, complicated fictional character. Be a little mistrustful of the first answers your mind serves up, because we're inherently lazy. And the first thing your mind will reach for is a cliche, because the cliches they're on the shelves that are easiest to reach in your mind. So that's fine. Pull off those cliches from the easy to reach shelf, but don't stop there. Keep going. And if you feel like, I would say, if you feel like, I know my character's formative experience. He could have stopped a criminal, and a criminal killed his Uncle Ben, and now he's a crime fighter. It can work in some contexts, but I wouldn't stop there. I'd keep going. Most people and their drives are a little more complicated than that. Okay, so that's just on this early California morning where I'm only half caffeinated. That's where my mind is at, about ways of approaches to creating realistic characters. But before I forget, let me share with you a few other things I've come across recently that I thought were such great frameworks for understanding story, world building, characters. I'm always looking for this kind of stuff. I hope at this point I'm reasonably good at my craft. I should be. I've written a bunch of books and I'm making an okay living in the business, but I always want to understand craft better. I just find craft interesting in its own right. And by the way, there's a saying you'll come across from time to time. I know I have, and it irritates me because it's misleading. I hate things that are misleading. And the saying is, well, you can't teach art. And the reason I hate that saying is it's the worst kind of misleading. It's true, and it isn't the point. Yes, you can't teach art. Art is going to be some sort of expression of your individual soul. You've either got that or you can't. No one else can do your art except you. If you had never been born, your art never would have been born either. But it isn't the point. You can't teach art. You can't learn art. Nobody should be trying to teach art, but you can teach and you can learn craft. And you can't be an artist until you have mastered craft, whatever craft means, whatever rather mastery means. I know what craft means. So we don't have to get into a discussion about, like, well, have you ever really mastered craft? Whatever, you get better and better at craft. And art is built on craft, and craft can be taught. So whenever someone says, well, you can't teach art, it's one of those things that irritate me because a lot of people buy into that. And I once attended a conference in San Francisco many years ago, and Catherine Coulter, big best-selling romance writer, was the keynote speaker. And she spent her keynote telling the audience that it was all luck. You're going to become an author, you're going to be a best-selling author, whatever. It's all luck. And that was to me almost a sin, primarily because it's not accurate. And two is because it was silly. I thought, well, what are all these people spending $500 a pop for this weekend conference? If it's all luck, they should just sit on the street corner and wait for the money truck to come by, dump a bunch of money on their head and get lucky. So I don't like that kind of misleading advice. I don't put Catherine Coulter down. I don't know her in any other context. She may be a terrific writer and a terrific person, but on that occasion, she gave unsound advice to a lot of people. Luck is always a factor in everything we do. Even if the only luck you're depending on is the absence of bad luck, luck is always a factor. Our job is to do everything we can to reduce our exposure to bad luck and improve our susceptibility to good luck. That's our job. That means writing a manuscript. That means getting as good at craft as we can. Then maybe the money truck won't ever come by, or the best-selling and the fame and fortune and all that stuff. But it doesn't matter, because none of those things can be guaranteed. They can't be controlled. Our job is to do all the things we can do to make those things as likely as possible. Mastery of craft is one of those things. And you can absolutely learn craft. I know, because I have. I've come across things from McKee and others, and I'm like, I'll be damned. Or just by happenstance. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but let me say this. The best advice I've ever heard, and probably the best advice I've ever passed on, is this. Learn to read like a writer. Maybe you already do this and I'm giving you advice you don't need, but I'll say it anyway. Read like a writer. What I mean by that is this. We all read like readers. I've never met anyone who's a writer who doesn't love to read. I wonder if there'd be a weird exception. I doubt it. All writers love to read. So when we read like readers. You're just enjoying the book. You're not really thinking about it. You're just appreciating it. And that's all there is to it. And that's beautiful. But if you want to be a writer, you also want to read like a writer. And here's what I mean. Whatever it is you're writing, whatever kind of book, story, poetry, whatever, find the exemplars that are like what you're trying to do, that have inspired you. So this can mean anything. Like if you want to write horror and you love like Stephen King, Stephen King, especially those early books that are more pure horror. I just love them. They're like the best horror books I've ever written. Great. Go back and reread them. Reread them as many times as you need to habituate to the magic of those books. You stop getting distracted by the magic. And now you can start looking for the magic trick. That's the technique. That's the craft. You can do this at any level. You can ask yourself, what is it that makes a great horror book a great horror book, romance or Western or whatever? But you can start breaking it down too. What makes great dialogue? Great dialogue. What makes a great love scene? A great love scene or action scene, or et cetera, et cetera. Whatever you're having trouble with, whatever you're trying to do, find an example of that. Like the best example, oh my God, this time I read, like this love scene is so steamy. Oh, it was amazing. Good. Go read that love scene. Get titillated. Get past that. And then look at it and say, why is it working so well? There is always a magic trick behind the magic. Once you're no longer distracted by the magic, by the sleight of hand. I don't mean that in a bad way, by the way. I think this kind of magic is beautiful. But you got to get past the being distracted by the magic so you can start to look for the magic trick. And it is always there if you look for it. That's what it means to me to read like a writer. And it is the most powerful thing you can do, other than, well, you want to read a lot, you have to write. If you want to be a writer, you got to write. But don't forget to read like a writer. There is nothing better you'll do. You start to see those magic tricks and you'll be like, son of a bitch, that's what you're doing. And this is part of the reason when I say I'm always looking for craft, it interests me. I like to know the magic trick behind the magic. One, because it helps make me a better magician. But two, is I just find it interesting in its own right. I just find the magic trick fascinating. So I always like to know a little more about what it is that creates that magic. So I'm always looking for this. Anyway, if you ever hear anyone say, well, you can't teach art, you say, yeah, that's true, but so what? You say that. You tell them. All right. Anyway, so a few other things I've come across recently that I found helpful. Here's one, and I loved it. It's so simple. It was a description of, so what is a story? Like, how do how do you describe, like, what is a story? Like, if you're talking to a Martian, this is what a story is. Once upon a time, and then one day. I was like, I'll be damned. That's right. You take just like any movie or story you love, and you can break it down to that level. That's a framework. It's a beginning. It's not all there is to it, obviously. But if you think about it, you can describe almost any story this way. So I started doing this with movies I like, because I love movies. And I was like, once upon a time, there was a palooka who didn't respect himself, and nobody respected him. And then one day he had a shot at the title. Oh, that's Rocky. He did this with anything. Once upon a time. And then one day. And before I forget, recently I've come across a couple instructional videos that I found really useful. So let me mention them to you so you can go check them out when we're done talking. And hopefully you'll find them as useful as I did. The first is by a guy, he's a screenwriter named Michael Arndt, A-R-N-T. And he's probably best known for writing Little Miss Sunshine. He's got two videos. The first is called, damn it, I think it's called Great Endings, or Endings, the good, the bad, and the insanely great. But I'm pretty sure if you just Google Michael Arndt, Great Endings, you'll find the link. And he also has one on Great Beginnings, which is also good, but it's not quite the level of the one on Endings. There was so much craft, so much story craft in that video. I was knocked out. He analyzes Star Wars, The Graduate, and Little Miss Sunshine, his own movie, in ways that I found extremely useful and eye-opening. And by the way, I love movies. I also love novels, and there are obviously differences in the craft of movie writing and novel writing, but there are a lot of similarities too. There are a lot of principles you can learn from one and apply to the other. So that was one of the best videos I've ever come across, Michael Arndt. And there's another one. I should have this stuff written down. I'm sorry, so I can instantly get you to it. This was a TED Talk. It was a big eye opener for me. I'm trying to remember. I think it's Andrew Stanton is the guy, the speaker. Just the way it sounds, Andrew Stanton. And the title of his talk was like 2 + 2 = 4. If you Google that, you'll find it. It's a TED Talk. Let me talk briefly about what 2 + 2 = 4 means, because a lot of people don't get it. And I think I was getting it, or have been getting it in my books, but I wasn't conscious of it. I like to be conscious of these things. If you're conscious of it, you can almost always use it better, more effectively. 2 + 2 = 4 means this. You don't spell it out for the reader. You present things, character aspects, story aspects, world building aspects, and you let your reader fill in the blanks, connect the dots, add the numbers up to reach a conclusion. The more you present conclusions to your reader, the less interesting it is. Now, this is a little tricky to do because it takes a certain confidence and a certain skill level. I know when I was starting out, I was too what Robert McKee calls on the nose, or presented to the reader, because I didn't trust my readers. I'm like, what if they don't get it? What if they don't get it? It takes a little time in the saddle before you start trusting your readers to get it. But I want to do a quick exercise with everyone from a book called The Key to Rebecca. It's a thriller by Ken Follett, the author Ken Follett. And if this is your kind of book, I would recommend checking out the first page, maybe the first half dozen paragraphs of The Key to Rebecca, because I have never seen ever a better opening to a story than this one. It might not be to your taste, in which case you'll say, well, Barry, it wasn't for me. And that's fine, of course. Subjectivity is a huge part. Taste is a huge part of what attracts us to stories. But even if this is not your kind of story, there is no denying the craft, the skill. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I sometimes do, and we talk about it for an hour. But let's just talk very briefly so you can see what I mean by 2 + 2 = 4. I'm going to give you the first sentence, the first paragraph of The Key to Rebecca. You don't even know what it's about other than that it's a thriller. I'll tell you what, it's a World War II thriller. And it's about the critical battle of El Alamein, where the Allies turned back the Nazi tank thrust in northern Africa. A critical battle that was decided in part by intelligence and deception. That's our world. The first sentence, 6 words, first sentence, first paragraph. The last camel collapsed at noon. That's it. Now, let's talk about this. What do you know from that sentence, and what can you sense? I know this might be, I don't know how interactive we can make it on Zoom, but think 2 + 2 = 4. Assuming that we can trust Follett as the narrator, and let's assume we can. There's always the unreliable narrator, that sort of thing, but forget about that for now. If we can trust him as the narrator, then all we can be sure of are the bare facts of what he told us. The last camel collapsed at noon. So it's noon, wherever we are, it's noon, and a camel collapsed. And that's about all we know. But let's break it down a little further, because these word choices are so interesting. The last camel. Now, what do we sense from that? This is 2 + 2 = 4. And
that there were a whole herd and they died, or a critical number died.
Pretty sure.
And,
pretty sure.
And they must be pretty important. Camels must be pretty important to this mission. And we also know that camels are in hot climates or deserts. That's where they thrive.
All these things.
Yeah. I mean, it gives you like location. It gives you a sense of tension because, oh my gosh, the last one. It gives you some idea that this was a terribly important event. So far,
all these things.
That's what I get from the first 2 words.
Think about that. It's incredible. 6 words. And this is something I've always noticed. Really good writing, this 2 + 2 = 4 kind of writing, the ratio of the number of words or the amount of screen time to the amount of time you can discuss what's being implied there's so much you can discuss compared to how few words there are. 6 words, the last camel collapsed at noon. Right, all these things. And so Follett, now 4 is desert, and we are in fact in a desert, but that's the conclusion. We're in a desert. And a less skilled craftsperson might have said something about, in the first paragraph, well, my readers need to know we're in a desert. I want to make sure they're grounded in the story, and we need to picture their blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to tell them we're in the Sahara, and then they'll know. But Follett's way too good for that. Follett says the last camel collapsed at noon, and he knows that the implicit storytelling grammar of the reader's mind will immediately start envisioning deserts, because camels. And noon, the other thing is noon. So the last camel collapsed at noon. What's a 2 +? Is it cold or is it hot? It's hot, but he never tells you it's hot. Now this is 2 + 2 = 4. The last camel collapsed at noon. And in the back of your mind, you got to spend some time thinking about this, because if you just read this book for the first time, like I did, it's not like I stopped and marveled at all the magic tricks that were going on in the background. I was just implicit in my mind, as someone who loves books and has been reading since he was a kid. It's all just happening. I immediately start envisioning deserts, sand, heat. As Jackie was saying, you start getting the idea that this isn't a good thing. It's like, is it good that thank God the last camel collapsed? I mean, I've been carrying these 16 camels, and finally I get to put them. That's not what's happening. Something bad happened, which, by the way, is a good way to hook a reader, because what do people do when they see a car accident? They rubberneck. It's not pretty, but it's how we're wired. So obstacles, conflict, this is what keeps people glued to a story. And Follett didn't say a bad thing happened, but he implied it. And this engages that implicit grammar in your mind. You want to start knowing what's going on. He doesn't say the 3rd camel or the 6th camel. He says the last camel. Oh, shit. That can't possibly be good. That's so great. I could go on, because if you're curious, again, I've never seen better craft. Go to the first page of Key to Rebecca and analyze it the way we just analyzed it. And you'll see it's incredible how much he's doing with so little, how skillfully he engages that implicit storytelling grammar of the reader's mind to hook the reader. It is just a mastercraft. And this is what I mean when I say read like a writer. Break it down. Now I write thrillers, so the best exemplar for me, certainly not the only exemplar. I'll learn from anything I can learn from, and you can learn from all kinds of genres, all kinds of not even just novels, all kinds of things. But the heart of it for me is a thriller. So when I see a master craftsperson like Follett at work, I really want to learn from that because that's my wheelhouse. But again, do this with whatever you respond to. Do it with that. Okay, so that's an example. That's 2 + 2 = 4. That's where you're just giving those little things, and it engages the reader's mind. And once you're aware of it, oh my God, it is such a powerful tool. Let me think. There was one other thing I wanted to mention that came across recently. I think there was, but maybe I'm wrong. I thought there was one other rubric. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just haven't had enough coffee. I think that's the gist of it. How are we doing so far? Is this useful? Am I touching on things you're interested in? Am I hinting at things you'd rather talk about? You tell me.
I love the character, how to build a character. So often we just stick with the basics. He was 5'10" and he had curly hair, and that's his character.
Yeah.
Or he could smell real good.
Yeah. And look, since you mentioned that, here's another trick I've noticed. Oh, I know what I want to. I got 2 things I want to say. One is, from reading that first page, reading and rereading and teaching that first page of Follett's book, I came across another technique, another magic trick, which I'll share with you. And this is the kind of thing that you learn when you read like a writer. Follett's got a knack for making his scenes come alive. I mean, his settings, the physical geography. And I noticed what he was doing. And my feeling is always like, I see you, I got you. You know, like whenever I see that, I'm like, I see the little sleight of hand. It's so exciting. It's this. He gives you the broad brush first, not obviously. Like here, we're starting to envision a desert, but he doesn't say desert. Farther down on the page, he finally gets around to saying desert. But only after he's first engaged your mind and made you curious. You're like, is it a desert? I think it's a desert. You want to know, am I right? You always want to know. And so eventually he says desert. So, and he does a beautiful job of giving you, like if this were a movie, it would be I don't know what these things are called, but like the far away shots, you can see the whole vista. He describes it beautifully as just an endless series of hillocks. Better than this, but that's like what you're saying is an endless vista of sand hillocks, one pretty much identical to the other for as far as the eye can see. So that's the deep focus, maybe they call it, whatever, like you're far away. But then he brings it in tight with the telling detail that brings the scene to life. There's a scene where the man and the camel had been, just before it collapsed, they'd been climbing one of the hillocks, man and beast planting feet in the inconstant sand, blah, blah, blah. And I love the fact that, like, if this were a camera, he zeroes in on the feet and the little rivulets of sand that I imagine being dislodged from the feet as they try to climb this hillock. That's the tight shot. And I thought, that's how you do it. You give you got to see what's the big scene, but then the little detail, the telling detail that brings the scene to life. And then when I was writing one of my books, the third book, I was in Hong Kong doing sort of research. There's a part of town called Sham Shui Po. Crazy outdoor market, just madcap, frenetic. And I was describing it, gave the big vista. And then I saw this shirtless guy. It was back to a lamppost amid all the craziness and chaos, clipping his nails, like he was just all by himself. And I included that detail in the book because to me, it's what set off all the scene. Maybe by contrast, all the buying and selling and hawking, pigeons flying overhead, all the madcap frenzy, and then just this dude, clip, clip, clip. And so I use that. Anyway, that's a technique I learned from reading Like a Writer, and maybe it'll be useful to you. Okay, so that's one thing. And then Jackie, when you mentioned a moment ago, like, yeah, he was 5'9" and he smelled real good or whatever. This is another thing I've noticed about good all writing. The more things the writing accomplishes, the better it is. And let's start at zero with writing, meaning let's say a passage, a sentence, a chapter, it doesn't matter. If it accomplishes nothing, it needs to be cut out. It's the worst kind of writing. It's useless by definition. Or it needs to be changed so that it does something. Writing that accomplishes one thing, you can't cut out, but it needs to be changed because it's boring. The classic example of writing that accomplishes one thing and therefore is boring is the character curriculum vitae, the resume, the data dump. We've all seen it. Beginning writers tend to do it. And the reason beginning writers tend to do it is because they instinctively sense that the information is critical. Well, you won't understand my whole story if you don't know that my character was 5'9" and smelled good and all this kind of stuff. They're not wrong about that, but the presentation is dull because it only accomplishes one thing. If it accomplishes only one thing, I promise you it is boring. It won't engage the implicit grammar or implicit storytelling grammar of your mind. And you might read it, but it will be dull. And we never want to be dull. Elmore Leonard famously said in his rules for writers, people said, like, why are your novels so compulsively readable? He said, I leave out the parts that readers don't like. I leave out the parts people find boring. More easily said than done. And with this framework, keep it in mind. Go look at writing passages, scenes from movies, whatever, and start breaking it down, reading like a writer. And you will find that the absolute most magical writing is accomplishing many things at once. Those first 6 words of Key to Rebecca, pretty good example. All the things that were probably it's a desert, probably it's a bad thing that happened, probably those camels were critical, etc. 6 words to accomplish all those different things. The best example I know of feeding you character background, giving you the necessary, like, actual resume details of characters, but in a way that accomplishes multiple things so that you don't notice what's going on. It's from an old James Cameron movie called The Abyss. Has anyone here seen The Abyss? Okay, I love this movie. They couldn't stick the landing. I think they set it up so that they couldn't end it quite right. And I've never met anyone who could come up with a better ending. And it frustrates me because it's such a great movie, but the ending wasn't right. Anyway, this is a scene. Okay. I'm sorry, I know I'm bouncing around as the caffeine kicks in. Here's another rubric I came across recently, which I loved. A way to understand stories. Think of it like any book or any television show, really great ones. You can always describe it like this. It's about X, but it's really about Y. It always works. X will typically be the surface elements, the genre elements, and Y will be like the deeper human or thematic or philosophical elements. And I started to do it instinctively with The Abyss, because The Abyss is about this undersea submersible platform that runs into undersea aliens and they have a big adventure. But it's really about a man and a woman whose marriage is broken because they think they hate each other, but they really love each other. And they're going to rediscover their love through shared danger. Okay, that's The Abyss. There's a scene where we meet the 2 principals. We don't know the heart of the movie yet. We know it's about undersea aliens and that kind of stuff. We don't know the heart of it, but the heart is that relationship. You take out the heart and all you'll have is some good action sequences, but the movie won't really move you. So it's critical that we start to understand the heart of this movie. Ed Harris plays the husband, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, the wife. And we don't know who they are yet. He's on this thing at the bottom of the ocean, and she calls him from a Navy ship on the surface. There's a kind of umbilical cord between the ship and the undersea, the submersible that's on the ocean floor. And I won't do the whole thing, but it's genius. So he picks up the phone and and it's a video call. He says, "Hi, Lynn. She says, Bud, what the hell are you doing with my rig? Stop right there. Do these characters know each other? Yeah. We don't know how exactly, but this is not the first time they've talked. Do they like each other? Don't think so. Guessing. This is the other thing. There are things you can tell for sure, and there are things you don't know at all. And then there's everything in between that you can sense with greater or less confidence. Sounds like there's some animosity here. But what the hell are you doing with my ship? And then he says, it's not your ship. With my rig. That's what you're going. What the hell are you doing with my rig? He goes, it's not your rig, Lynn. She says, I designed it. I built it. I'd say it's mine. What are we learning? That's the resume. Oh, she's an engineer. She designed this thing. That is all critical. Later in the story, she's fixing things that are breaking, and the aliens and all the things that are going wrong. And she knows this rig really well, so she's able to do stuff to repair it. It wouldn't make any sense if we hadn't learned early on that she's the genius who designed this whole thing. And then he says, well, the Navy pays the bills, and so that means that's where I take my orders. And she says, and she starts tearing into him again, and he says, I'm shortening a little bit. He goes, I'm not doing this, Lynn. I'm not doing this. I'm going to hang up. And she's like, Bud, you never did have the stomach for a fight. Don't you hang up on me. And he hangs up. I'm not doing this. So stop. This guy has an actual policy for not getting drawn into a fight with this person. So again, we're like, they know each other well. They've danced this dance a lot of times. He actually developed a policy to deal with her. We're learning about their character traits. She's pugnacious. She's tough. He prefers to avoid confrontation. All these things are going on. And then he hangs up, and there's a guy in the room with him. And Ed Harris goes, God, I hate that bitch. And the guy says, maybe you shouldn't have married her then. And it's genius because you laugh. Didn't see that coming. It's a punchline. But actually, Cameron is giving you some of the most critical information of the movie. It's the heart of the movie. It's about a husband and wife. You got to know they're married. On the verge of divorce. She's already filed the papers. You'll learn later. He could have done this a lot of different ways. Ed Harris could have picked up the phone and said, hello, wife of mine, a little sarcastically. Oh, now I know they're husband and wife, whatever. He did it in this genius way that he uses the husband-wife thing as a punchline. You laugh, you don't even realize his purpose in writing this scene. I got to give you the resume. I got to give you the nature of the relationship. I got to give you the husband and wife. And he does all these things. It doesn't say they're 5'9", he smells really good. It's in there. It's critical. You need to know these things, but he does it so that all these things are happening at the same time. And that's great writing. At least 3 things. I could break it down further. We all could. At least 3 things. And that's what makes the writing so effective. So think in those terms. The more things the writing accomplishes, the better it is. And related to that, one more thought.
Always ask a question.
Please. I'm sorry if you don't.
No, I just wanted to
never take a breath.
ask a question about that point in particular. So is dialogue the best way to accomplish that, or is there a way to do it, or do we want to use exposition, or?
So that's a good question. To accomplish that, you mean like showing the character?
Mm-hmm.
I would say dialogue is one way. Probably, immediately my mind always turns to the exceptions, but I would say behavior. Dialogue is a form of behavior. So you can show characters doing things, and whatever the characters are doing will reveal something about that character. There's a scene in the movie. I don't know why I do this because I'm a novelist and I always think of movies. Not always, obviously. I did The Key to Rebecca, but anyway, there's a movie called About Schmidt. And the opening of the movie is, because there's no dialogue, that's why I thought of it. It's Jack Nicholson sitting in an office. Everything is very tidy in the office, boxed up, in fact. And he's sitting at his desk with his hands folded. There's clearly nothing to do. There's no paperwork on the desk. Everything is boxed. And he's looking up at a clock on the wall, and the clock is ticking, and it's 4:59, 10 seconds, 9 seconds, 8 seconds, 5 o'clock. And then he stands up and he picks up the box and he walks out of the room. So here we're learning something about this character. He's been a company man his whole life, very precise and punctual about his job. It's really all he has. His marriage is he's sort of estranged from his wife and himself. And then it's a story of the characters going to reconnect with himself and his wife. But that's what we're learning about him from his behavior, sitting there watching the clock. It's the last day of work. You'd think, dude, it's okay if you get up 10 seconds early, but no, he is devoted to the company and the precision of 5 o'clock, not 1 minute earlier. So you're learning something about him, not from dialogue, from his behavior. Okay, one other movie, because this is something I did. I tortured my daughter when she was small, and she thanks me for it now because she's a super talented writer. And my wife and I both recognize that from when she was young. And I always thought, like, it's an advantage. My wife is a literary agent, herself a children's book writer. And I thought, wow, to be talented, to be born with talent and to have two parents who are both professionals, like that's the ultimate combination. Like, I wrestled in high school and there were these two brothers, Luke and Jude Scove, and they were the New Jersey state wrestling champions at 141 and 148, which is pretty serious. New Jersey is a strong wrestling state. Those guys were great. Well, why were they great? Sure, natural talent, of course, but their father was a former wrestler. And when he had twin boys, he took the basement and he just took everything out of them, put wrestling mats in. And from when those boys were, just about out of diapers, Dad was teaching them. Not a coincidence that they became so great. So my wife, Laura, and I, we really wanted to give Emma that, look, this is an advantage. You've got the talent. So whenever we watched a movie, and I still do this, I hit pause. And she's like, Daddy, please. I'm like, come on, baby, let's get this out of the way. So when she was little, we were watching The Bad News Bears. I think there was a remake, but this was the original with Walter Matthau. And if you haven't seen it, just very briefly, the movie opens with, it's a beat up old powder blue convertible Cadillac, old car. And it drifts up onto like down the street, bumps up on the curb and onto the grass next to a baseball field. And inside the car is just detritus. It's got some pool cleaning equipment, but also like a lot of crushed empty beer cans and detritus and stuff. And I see, if I'm remembering correctly, he comes to a slow halt, but he's obviously drunk just from the way he drives up on the lawn and all that kind of stuff. So I hit pause. Emma says, Daddy, please. I said, come on, let's get this out of the way. I said, baby, what do we know about this character? She says, he's drunk, he's a drunk, and all the junk in his car shows that his life is really disorganized and messy. And I'm like, that's right. And so what can we tell about the probable trajectory of the story? She's like, he's gonna get his life in order somehow. I'm like, okay, that's all.
I hate to bring this to say that this is, I could go on listening to this forever. I've taken all kinds of notes, but we have one question that's in the chat, and then I'm going to have to call. First of all, you will be here all day if we keep on like this, and you will.
No, and I'm sorry, I should have stopped talking and turned it over to that.
Oh no! Oh my God!
I'm sorry.
But Dutch has a question. Please give an example of a character trait that the character is not aware of.
Character trait that the character is not aware of. Oh
right.
My God.
Got Madman and the hidden level.
Yeah. So it's funny because so I watched that video that I told you about, and then immediately I started talking to Laura about it. And then we immediately started applying it to my characters. And I don't want to talk too much about my character. I mean, sometimes I do if it's a really good example, but I don't know. It always seems a little boorish. Let me tell you about my fantastic characters.
Oh, no, do, because they are fantastic. Talk about.
You're nice to say. I'll just say this. One of my serious characters, John Rain, he's a contract killer. He's an interesting guy, interesting for me. He's interesting because of his contradictions. And by the way, I think that's probably a principle right there, right? People with contradictions make them interesting. They're Tony Soprano. On the one hand, he loves his family, but he does things that are so destructive to his family. And so those sorts of contradictions are always interesting in people. And Rain thinks of himself as a realist. He explicitly describes himself. The novels are told, the Rain scenes anyway, are told in first person. He describes himself as a realist, prides himself on being a realist, but he's wrong. He's really a cynic. And the reason he's a cynic is because really, really, beneath everything, rock bottom, he's a romantic. He longs for a connection with another person, for a cause larger than himself. But he's been embittered by experience, including betrayal. And he now wears cynicism like a kind of armor to protect himself from disappointment, betrayal. But he does not acknowledge this to himself. If you were here with him, he wouldn't be telling you what I'm telling you. He would say something like this. It's a tough world filled with duplicity, betrayal. You've got to watch your back. No one else is going to watch it for you. You got to preempt the betrayal. And that's the only way to survive. I'm just being a realist. That's all. No, a lot more going on there than that. And that's one example of those sorts of layers that I'm talking about. Yeah, that what I said a minute ago, or more than a minute ago, earlier in this talk, about what does your character want? What does your character really want? If you ask Rain, what do you want? He would say, this is another example. He's always talking about retiring. He wants to get out of the killing business. In fact, there's perennially interest in a Rain movie or television show, and so far it hasn't really gone anywhere. We'll see. But I came up with what I think would be a terrific tagline for a television show, which I hope one day they'll have occasion to use, and it's this. The name of the show will be Rain, killing his way out of the killing business. And I like this for a lot of reasons. One is, thank you, Angelin. I see you nodding your head. I appreciate that. I came up with it myself. So the reason I like this tagline, I like it for a lot of reasons. On a genre level, remember I said it's like, it's about X, but it's really about Y. So it's about X. It's like, do you like assassins? Do you like contract killing and thrillers? This show's for you. It's got killing twice right in the tagline. Killing his way out of the killing business. By the way, I once got a bad review on Amazon for my book, The Killer Collective. The person said, this book is brimming over with killing. 3 stars. I very rarely comment on negative reviews. Most of my reviews, I'm glad to say, have been positive. I very rarely comment on the negative ones because my feeling is, like, I try to learn from everything I can learn from. So even if someone says something really harsh and impolite, I try to set aside my defensive feelings and say, okay, but is there anything true in there, anything I can learn from once I set my ego aside? And sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But this one I thought was hilarious because I said, you do realize the book is called The Killer Collective. Like, you remember the Ridley Scott movie Gladiator from like 20 plus years ago, Russell Crowe. It's about Roman gladiators, and Laura and I saw it with some friends of ours when we came out, and I said, what'd you think? And this couple we saw it with, Marcy, she goes, it was like a little bit too much fighting in the movie. I said, Marcy, did you not catch on the way in the movie's called Gladiator? Like, you can't blame them for delivering exactly what they promised in the title. So that was a funny one I got for the Killer Collective. This book positively brims with brimming over with killing. Okay, anyway. I totally forgot the point I was going to make. I'm so sorry.
Okay, Barry, I have one question I'm curious about. I wanted to tell you that the data dump example that you gave in dialogue with the Abyss was very helpful for me, because
good, I'm glad.
I got my hand slapped by Angela and Jackie on a story that I was writing that had some data dump in it, and so it's hard to figure out. But I have a question about not just building complex characters, but what a lot of authors tend to do is that whenever they're trying to tell an epic tale, or at least what they think is an epic tale, especially if it's historical, that they have a tendency to put a lot of characters into a story.
Mm-hmm.
What is your feelings on that as far as story development and reader understanding of being able to follow a story with like 12 characters that you see over a period of time that you may or may not remember as you go along. Tell me how you would you do that? And if you would, what is a successful way of doing that?
That's a great question. Okay, so first, not only would I do it, but I have done it. I've got 4 series that have all combined a little bit, think like Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, that kind of thing, so that they've just overlapped increasingly to the point where my latest, which comes out in September, the Chaos Kind, I've actually, the 4th world got integrated with the first 3. So now is all my characters. It's quite a big cast of characters. Other books I've written are smaller casts. There's obviously no right or wrong answer here. It's just a question of what are you trying to do and how are you going to do it? And by the way, I want to pause there and emphasize what I just said, because it shouldn't just be implicit. What and how. Always keep this in mind when you're writing. What are you trying to do is distinct from how are you going to do it. And it's been my observation that beginning writers don't adequately distinguish between those two things. So sometimes when I'm teaching writing, someone will do the data dump. Like, here's my character. He's a former Navy SEAL and he's got a black belt in Taekwondo or whatever. And that's why he can open up a can of whoop ass or whatever. And I'm like, so the way you presented it, it's boring because it only accomplishes one thing. It's like reading a resume. And the person will always say, not always, but typically say, yeah, but you need to know that he's a former Green Beret or this or that. Otherwise it won't make sense later on. And I'm like, I get it. What you're trying to accomplish, your goal, your objective is the reader needs to know that my character is former military. But that is distinct from how you present that. There are a lot of different ways how. Earlier on, I mentioned that scene from The Abyss. What Cameron was trying to do there was actually many things. But let's just take one of them. I need you to know that this is a husband and wife. How does he do that? He can do it a lot of different ways. He chose one. Keep that in mind when you're thinking, like, what am I trying to do? How am I going to do it? It's a critical distinction. So what am I trying to do? It depends. Like in the Chaos Kind, or the previous book, The Killer Collective, which also has a big cast of characters. It's I guess about a group of, you could think of it as a group of lone wolves who have every reason not to trust each other, but if they don't figure out a way to cooperate, then their common enemy is going to pick them off one by one and kill them. And so despite all their different worldviews, personalities, and general prickliness and distrustfulness, they have to find a way to trust each other. So that to me is the heart of the story. I've done this a few times in different ways, a book called The Detachment, The Killer Collective, and now The Chaos Kind. That's what I'm trying to do. How do you manage a really big cast so that each character is memorable? It's a great question. And I feel like I'm not going to have a great answer because this one I haven't thought enough about consciously, but I'll mention just a couple things that I think are at least barking up the right tree. One thing you always want is really distinct characters. You'll see that, look, let's take an example of dialogue. Dialogue that's cooperative is inherently less interesting than dialogue that's confrontational. I'm not saying you should never do cooperative dialogue. There's a place for it. But if you analyze dialogue, go look at the best dialogue, the most crackling dialogue you can think of, it's always going to be conflict, always. And by the way, I'm sorry, I just always got to slide in another thing I learned from Robert McKee, which was so eye-opening for me from one of his lectures. Text and subtext. And all these principles, by the way, overlap, but we don't have time to get into all the overlaps. You'll see that on your own as you start playing with them. Text and subtext. Text is what is said, subtext is what is meant. And the greater the gap between the text and the subtext, the better the dialogue. The less gap, the more boring the dialogue. That's just a principle. Now that you know the principle, go watch for it. When people are saying one thing, but there's so much below the waterline that's implied or meant, suggested, the dialogue is better. So when I have a big cast of characters, I think I was fortunate this way. It's not like I was planning that my characters would have such distinct personalities and worldviews and different ways of talking, different objectives, different methods, but they do. And when you throw together a bunch of characters like that, you get much more interesting interactions than you would if you put a bunch of characters together who are fundamentally the same. Like, think about this. You know, what makes, it's interesting is because it's broader than just this. Well, what makes a military unit effective primarily is cooperation. I don't want to get too far out on this one. I'm not former military, and probably some former military people would say, no, Barry, you're wrong. It's this or that. But I think I can make a pretty good case that military cohesion, cooperation is what makes a military unit more effective. It's why a cooperative military unit will defeat solo warriors over time. It's the way it works. You say maybe they don't have the daring do, but cooperation wins over time. By the way, I read a super interesting book a couple of years ago called Sapiens, A Short Guide to Human History or something like that. If you're curious, check it out. It was amazing, Sapiens. And this guy's thesis is that the most distinct aspect of Homo sapiens is our ability to cooperate with each other. It's what distinguished us from all other animals, including Neanderthals, and gave us this incredible advantage. It's really interesting. But if you were to depict a military unit that's extremely disciplined and effective in battle as a result, it might be boring because these people cooperate so well with each other. They march in unison, they know each other's moves, and they're doing everything perfectly as part of a unit. It could be interesting for a little while, but not for very long. What you want, if you want it to be interesting, they should have different characteristics. Now, immediately my mind goes to Saving Private Ryan. So start thinking about the conflict there. When the men learn about the mission, they're like, I'm risking my life to save some guy. Why should I do that? Why is his life more valuable than mine? Or they have different personalities. Tom Hanks is a bit of a soothing personality, and some of the other men are more confrontational, can drill down deeper than that. This is what will make a big cast of characters interesting individually, also in their interactions, because the differences in the characters create conflict. And it'll also make the characters easier to remember because they're also distinct. By the way, I saw a really fun movie recently. It's called Shadow in the Cloud. It's really fun and clever. What's her name? I always forget. It's three-name actress, Chloe something Moretz. Anyway, she's terrific. It's a World War II movie. She spends most of her time like in the belly of this airplane alone, in communication with all the men who were talking down to her, literally and figuratively, but she can't see them. And so the writer did something really clever. The writer made this an allied crew. So you've got a British accent, a Scottish accent, maybe an American Scottish drawl, American Southern drawl. But the point is, hey, we can't have all the men in the unseen airplane above with the same or similar voices. The viewer won't be able to distinguish. So the writer very cleverly gave them distinct accents and also personalities. And that's very helpful. So think of the same thing. If you're doing a big cast of characters, I would say you want them to be distinct individuals, both because if you're going to do two characters who are fundamentally the same, hey, just do one, save yourself the trouble. But also, when those distinct characters interact, it'll be interesting. If you look at any buddy story you've ever liked, it all starts with oil and water. I'm sorry for going to movies again. It's just how I roll. But think of the Lethal Weapon movies. I love those movies back in the day. And I think it might be a television show now. I haven't really followed it that much. But Shane Black created these two characters who are totally different. Like Danny Glover is a family man. He's by the book. He's nearing retirement. He just wants to do everything right. And Mel Gibson's literally crazy. He's crazy. And then he makes these two. He takes crazy risks. He's borderline, maybe even not borderline, suicidal. And then he throws these characters together under pressure and makes them work together. Oh, that's a great formula. That's how you do it. And then do it with 3 characters, 4 characters.
Well, let me ask you, interrupt
Please.
you there, because I'm wondering, we do world building, and you said that you have all your characters coming together. How do you have your worlds collide and have your characters? Do they compete for the attention, or do you get to pick your favorite child and let that child be the favored one of the story?
On that one, again, I would say no right or wrong answer. In my two previous big mashup stories, The Detachment and The Killer Collective, those I would describe as a little bit more driven by John Rain, my first series character. And his scenes are first person in those books. The other scenes are third person, which is in itself another story for, how do you keep those things straight? But and there are a lot of ways, but that would be a topic for another conversation. But I would say Rain was driving those stories more. But the most recent one, for the first time, I do Rain in third person, just like the other characters. And Rain has really, I wouldn't say faded. He's still a critical part of the story, but he isn't driving the story anymore. The other characters have come to the fore and they're more driving it. Rain is there more in a supporting role, I would say. And unfortunately, for purposes of teaching this kind of stuff, these things have come to me somewhat organically. So usually what happens is, it's funny how you don't think about the things when there's no friction, you don't think about it. It's just, that's why we always think like people whose politics are different from ours, they're too political. Whereas I don't even have politics. I am merely accurately apprehending reality the way it exists objectively. Everyone else has politics, unless they see it the way I do. And it's weird, we're wired that way. So on this, I haven't really thought this much about this. It was quite organic for me to write these books the way they got written. One thing I can tell you as I have is that luckily I realized, oh, wow, luckily these characters are all so different in fundamental ways that it made the collection of these characters interesting. It makes their interactions crackle, a lot of tension and conflict and uncertainty. If the characters had been more similar, I don't think it would have worked. So that's one thing, but it was never really a conscious decision for, oh, now I'm going to do a mashup. Rain's going to drive it more. Rain's going to drive it less. Those things just presented themselves, and I'm sorry I don't have a better answer. I can only tell you that I am now going to think about your question so that next time someone answers me, I'll have a more useful answer. I'm sorry for that. It's happened to me a few times, by the way, in my part-time career teaching. Like dialogue comes to me pretty naturally. And so when people ask me about dialogue, initially, I was like, I don't know, you just, and I had to think about it so I could articulate it better. By the way, this tracks with a theory I have about teaching. I could be wrong about this, but I'll bet Steven Spielberg is not a great teacher. He could be wrong, but teaching and doing are totally different skill sets. He's a great doer, great director, but I think he was born that way. And if you're born that way, you've never had an opportunity or a reason to think, how do you get from beginning to mastery? He was born with mastery or with an instinctive grasp of how to get there. So he's probably not very good at telling people what are the stepping stones. He never needed to think about it. That's my theory. So for the things we're naturally good at, I have a feeling unless we spend the time to consciously think about it, probably not good at teaching those things. It's the things we've mastered the hard way that we'll be good at teaching.
Well,
Ask me about things I was bad at initially. I'll be a better teacher.
Lynn,
I was going to say, I think you are a great teacher, and I could listen to you, and I would definitely extend an offer back to you to come and speak to us if you're willing, because your doors are open at any time, because I could listen to you for a long time.
You guys are very nice. Thank you.
Barry, I have to say, I think you did answer Lynn's question about the large cast of characters, because what you said was they all have to be distinct and memorable.
Yeah.
They can't all have black hair. They can't all, their last name
Right.
can't all start with K.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And I think you did give an answer. I'm with Lynn. Anytime you want to come back, anytime that I've just never enjoyed anybody so much.
You're so nice. Thank you.
Well, I think I can hardly wait to hear you on caffeine when you're full of caffeine.
Well, you did. There was a story arc here. It was pre-caffeinated.
I totally understand. But, and I actually couldn't see it. But when you start out fully caffeinated, I shudder to think what might happen.
If that was at all helpful, I'm really glad. I'm
I
glad.
wish, I wish you were my editor. I wish you were my co-author. I wish you were my next door neighbor.
You're really nice to say. I don't think I'm that great an editor, actually. It's weird. It's just not
Can I,
something
can I say one thing here?
Please.
Yes, Richard.
One thing, and this to take from Barry, what you've said in essence reminds me of a scene from a movie, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid,
Love that movie.
when they are discussing the rules of the knife fight. Which I think you made it clear there are no real rules. It's you got to do it and just master it.
Yeah, and again, it's not rules, it's principles. Like Robert McKee says, rules are things you have to do. There's nothing you have to do, but there are principles, and principles are things that if you do them, they'll work. And there's one other thing here made me think of, because it's maybe a personality flaw, but I hate misleading advice. Because think of what it costs. People don't know better and then they follow it. And sometimes people say, well, rules are meant to be broken. No, they are not. They're meant to be bent. That's what rules are for. They're meant to be bent. That's useful advice. Rules are meant to be broken. A chimpanzee can break rules. It doesn't know any better. It won't use the proper fork at the dinner table. It's a chimpanzee, of course. That's not the point. Any idiot can break rules. It's the easiest thing in the world. But to bend rules in service of your art, you first have to master the rules. You have to be so good with the rules. Sorry?
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's it.
No,
That's why. So
saying that, I say that to people all the time who are foolish enough to come to me for advice.
no, you're giving them good advice. So because people don't want to, and I get this, like people think like, what? Master the rules. I don't want to master the rules because I don't want to follow the rules. And the point of mastering the rules isn't to follow the rules. It's to learn how to bend them. The rules are there for a good reason. Call them principles. They're there for a good reason. If you do those principles, they will work, but you can't bend them the way you want to until you've mastered them. That's why you master them, not to follow them, to bend them.
Well, I am absolutely fired up, and I thank you so much, Barry, and thank you, Angeline, for reaching out. I wouldn't have had the nerve. I would have been too.
It's not a matter of nerve. Thank you. You caught me at the right moment. The truth is, I try to keep my head down most of the time, and I hate to say no. If you achieve a certain amount of whatever level of prominence I have, it's not. I mean, compared to many, it's nothing. But people do reach out to me for interviews and teaching and that sort of thing, and I like to because I feel like I've learned a lot during the course of my career, and I'm as I think you can tell, it's a thing for me. Like I try to learn things that I can communicate, and then I like to pass it on because people seem to find it useful. But then I also have to write my own books, and so I hate to say no. This is something I change about myself, feeling less guilty about saying no.
Well,
I always feel bad. And Angeline, you happened to catch me at just the right moment. I was between books, and you were so nice. And I said, all right, let's, and I'm always flattered. I'm like, why? I'm amazing. Anybody would want to listen to anything I have to say. So sure, I'll be happy to talk to you guys. But yeah, I'll now I have to say no to like the next 3 people who randomly contact me before I feel so overwhelmed with guilt that I'll say yes to the 4th one.
Well, no, here's the thing. Those of us who read your books want you to go on and write them.
You're nice. Thank you.
This is what I feel like. And Angeline is probably shaking her head. I can't see her. She's so tiny up there. But those of us who read your books know that this is something you need to do, and we want you to do it.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
We do. So I feel guilty now for keeping you for so long.
No. I love talking about this stuff. That's part of the problem. Once you get me going, I won't shut up. Let me say one last thing, just a reminder. It's the most important thing. I said it earlier in the conversation. Read like a writer. And so I don't know what you're all working on. I don't know what kind of stories you're trying to write. And some of the questions you've asked give me an idea of what your particular concerns are, but of course you'll have many more that we didn't get to talk about today. So whatever it is you're trying to do, One of the questions was a character trait that the character's not aware of. Go to the stories that you think might have something like that. Go look at them again and see how it's been done. Or Lynn, you asked about how do you do an ensemble cast? So find the best example you know of an ensemble cast and go read that book again and ask and see how it works. And if it's working great, ask yourself, what is going on here that make it so good? And this is the best way to start answering that question. And by the way, if you come across an example that's not working and it sucks, that's great too. The counterexample is great too. Because now what you want to do is say, why does it suck? And how would I make it better? And when you get to that point where you can identify what is the flaw and how would I improve it, you're really starting to get a handle on craft. It doesn't have to be, the great examples aren't the only ones that are useful. The bad ones can be useful too. So that is the most important thing I can leave you with. Anything you're trying to get better at, go find the best examples you know of that thing. Read them again and again until you start to see the magic trick. Look for that magic trick behind the magic. It's there and you'll find it.
Thank you, Barry. I like I say, I don't think I can't remember when I've enjoyed a meeting so much.
You guys are really nice. Thank you, Jackie. And thank you again, Angelin, for reaching out. If this was useful, I'm so glad. Good luck, everybody. Just keep at it. That's our job.
Right. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you again. Have a good day, everyone.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
Bye.
All right, Malice members, we need to have, can we cut off the Facebook feed?
Yeah, hold on one second.